Welcome to the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. Whether you are a seasoned professional or a first-time fundraiser, we have the advice you need to take your next step toward major gift mastery. I'm your host, Tom Dauber, President of Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. In this episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about faith-based fundraising. That's not everybody's cup of tea. There's lots of fundraising that goes on for all sorts of different types of causes in the world. And I know amongst my listeners, I've got people from every worldview, probably most religions, and even irreligious people. All that being said, I think there's important lessons to learn from the religious perspective when we're talking about fundraising. But at the same time, I wanted to talk about some things that were distinctly faith flavored in today's episode. So if that's not your bag, go ahead, feel free to tune out, but hopefully you can stick around and learn a few things, even if it's not your perspective. Regardless, one of the guys who really shaped my understanding from a theological perspective is a guy named Henri Nouwen. But he's a Catholic priest. Now, I'm not Catholic, I'm Protestant, but nonetheless, there's a lot of commonalities when we think about fundraising from a faith-based perspective. I wouldn't even limit that just within the world of Christianity. I mean, I would think even about Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, all the religions, really. There are certain things we all agree on. I think most of us would agree, most religions would agree that doing good now is beneficial somehow from a spiritual perspective, whether that's in your spiritual growth or investments in the afterlife, one might say. There's lots of different ways to look at it, and certainly all those worldviews don't agree on the specifics. But I think we all agree that giving is a good thing. Helping those around us is a positive thing. When that's the case, there's a certain perspective you can take as a fundraiser. And so I wanted to just take a minute to just review some of my favorite things from Henri's book that I often teach, especially when I'm dealing with faith-based nonprofits. I think the thing with Henri that I really appreciate is that, he boils down fundraising not to the dollars and cents, but to the impact that it has on the heart of the donor. And not just the donor, but the fundraiser as well. He views the difficulty of fundraising, the challenge of fundraising, as a place to pull us closer to God in our dependence upon Him. And he also looks at it as a place to pull the donor closer to God as their giving calls them deeper into that relationship. Now, Henri was, not French. He was Dutch. He was a Catholic priest. He was also a Harvard professor. And one of the most beloved spiritual kind of devotional writers of the 20th century. So even though he wasn't a fundraiser by trade, he wrote this small book, about 60 pages about fundraising. And I found it incredibly powerful. I mean, if you only have a short amount of time and you want to read something about fundraising that will change your perspective about it, read this. It doesn't take very long. And I just wanted to take today to revisit it, to look at it a little bit with you. I think the first thing that he brings up, and again, this is true whether you're someone who's raising money from a faith-based perspective or raising money from a secular perspective, fundraising is not begging. In fact, it's the opposite of that. And he makes that claim right up front. He argues that fundraising is the opposite of begging. He says, when we seek to raise funds, we're not saying, please, could you help us out because lately it's been hard? or because we have a need, right? It's because we have a vision that's amazing and exciting. We're inviting you to invest yourself through the resources God's given you, your energy, your prayers, your money, in the work that God has called us. If all you do is read his book and walk away with that, if you look at the rest of it and say, hey, I don't like that religious stuff, that's fine. Or if you're a Protestant, you don't like Catholic stuff, doesn't matter. If you just get that much from it, that's super valuable. If you're a fundraiser and you're walking into a meeting feeling bad about yourself, nervous, afraid, embarrassed even, you've already undermined your ask before your donor can open their mouth. Now, he wants us to stand up and to believe in what we're doing and to believe that we have something worth offering. Now, oftentimes I talk about this, even from a secular standpoint, of just being centered in what you're doing as a fundraiser, to know the value of it, to believe in it. Well, if you're doing faith-based work, that's even more important because we're talking about eternal things that last forever, things that will make a difference in the lives of people. And so that's the first one there, that fundraising is the opposite of begging. Now, point 2, this is a great one. And I'll tell you, there was a time where I was presenting to a group of pastors, all of whom were familiar with Nouwen. And I put a quote up by him. And it basically said, I'm not going to quote him directly, but he basically said that fundraising is as spiritual as preaching the gospel or feeding the poor, putting on a church service, something along those lines. And I put that quote up there. And I said to the group of pastors I was talking to, I said to them, okay, what are your thoughts on this quote by Henri Nouwen? And a pastor raised their hand, looked at me, and said, Henri Nouwen didn't say that. Oh, I think I had the same reaction. I think I laughed. He indeed did. He did. That was his view. He argues that fundraising, when it's grounded in prayer and undertaken in gratitude, should really be seen as a form of ministry where we joyfully are inviting others to invest in something special for God with their money, right? This is where faith-based organizations, especially, sometimes have a blind spot. They treat fundraising as a necessary inconvenience, something the development office handles so that the real ministry can happen. Nouwen collapses that distinction entirely. Asking is ministry. I mean, if you're a person of faith, if you believe in an afterlife, you probably believe that when we get into the afterlife, we're going to have a different perspective on what values and what matters. That many of the mundane things of this world that we're so distracted by won't matter as much. Now, that's certainly the Christian worldview. But if that's your belief, if that's what you think is true, when you're asking someone to give to a good thing, to make a positive difference in this world, and they say yes, they're going to be super glad they did that in the next life. Whatever positive investment it seems to be now will be magnified many times over in the next life. I mean, think of it this way. Will I be happier in the next life, in eternity, that I went to some fancy restaurants, dropped thousands of dollars on food that I ate and excreted out hours later? Or will I be happier that I spent that $1,000 on feeding the poor or promoting the faith in a way that's meaningful and helpful, right? Certainly, most of us coming from a faith perspective would believe, I have good meals. I love food. But ultimately, helping those around me is of more value than having a really expensive meal, right? So in that way, I'm doing them a favor as a fundraiser, I'm helping them invest in something that they're going to be really happy they invested in down the road, right? Fundraising is ministry. It's not a distraction from it. Now, another point that Henri makes that I think is really important for any fundraiser, regardless of whether or not, again, you're a secular person or a person of faith, right? Your security cannot be in money. This is probably Nouwen's hardest challenge, and the one a lot of fundraisers might skip over. He argues that only when we're free from money can we freely ask others to give to it. Freely ask others to give it. This is the conversion, kind of talks in religious terms, to which fundraising as ministry calls us. So what he's getting at is if your sense of worth, your job security, your anxiety level in donor meetings is tied to whether or not the gift comes in, you're not free. And donors can feel anxiety. You may have heard the phrase before, nobody likes a desperate salesperson, right? And that's true of fundraisers too. The fundraiser who needs the gift communicates need. The fundraiser who is free from the outcome communicates vision. Nouwen says the inner work of being free from money and dependence upon it is really the prerequisite to the outer ask. You might think about it this way. If anxiety and fear are the things that are driving me, I'm going to have a scarcity mindset. If I'm driven by vision and passion, that's exciting. If I'm excited and passionate about what might be, I'm not focused on fear. I'm not a slave to anxiety. I'm focused on abundance. I'm focused on an abundant vision, in fact. That's what we need. We need to be free of that anxiety about money. And I know that can be hard and that can be scary. Now, I'll tell you this too, and now this may be more of a faith-based only part of the messaging here in the podcast today. But if you are a Christian, if that's your worldview, if that's your background and where you're coming from, working in ministry, raising money for ministry, an important part of your belief is that God is your provider, that he's going to give you everything you need. And that's something that can be a challenge to rest in. Now, does that mean that Christian nonprofits never struggle with money, or that they never have to cut staff because they always have the money they need? Well, that's certainly not true. You know, I've seen Christian nonprofits do a bad job of fundraising. I've seen Christian nonprofits that probably didn't need to exist. I'm not telling you that you don't need to have anxiety because God will always help you make your budget. What I'm saying is that a Christian perspective on fundraising would agree that God's involved in the process multiple ways. That if you're doing a great job, if your ministry is doing important work, that you're depending on God, that, you know, and God wants you to exist, you will continue to have the budget you need, the funding that you need. At the same time, you know, if there's other things that God has for you, if he's going to provide in some other way outside of even working at that nonprofit, you know, even if that nonprofit stops existing, he's still got your back. He's still going to provide for you. And you don't have to really live in a place of anxiety. God wants you to live in a place of peace, really is the Christian teaching. And certainly we don't want to make money a God, because that just doesn't help you. Another point that Henri made that I think is super important is approaching fundraising in the spirit of gratitude. Nouwen writes that we do so knowing that God has already given us what we most need for life in abundance. Therefore, our confidence in our mission and vision and our freedom to love the person to whom we're talking about donating money do not depend on how that person responds. In this way, gratitude allows us to approach a fundraising meeting without grasping neediness and to leave it without resentment or dejection when we don't get the gift. Nor do we want to act like it's the most important thing in the world when we do close the gift. Sometimes fundraisers leave carrying, feelings of personal rejection. And you don't want that as a fundraiser. You're not going to last as a fundraiser if you take everything personally. Now, Nouwen also extended his argument beyond the fundraiser and what they're centered, right? And into where the donor is centered, right? For those who have funds, he would say, opportunities for, the term he uses, conversion, but you might also say just a deeper following of God, right? Related to their sense of power, their sense of influence, security, and even the control that money gives them. Nouwen was hoping that as a fundraiser, could give them an opportunity to place more of their trust in God and less of their trust in those other things. He wanted to give them the gift of discovering that they are loved, not because of material wealth, but because of the spiritual value they have had as people in the eyes of God. That's a big reframe in terms of what major gift conversations are. In Christian circles, you'll hear a lot about this, that you're not just raising money, but you're really offering the donor an opportunity of spiritual formation. Now, if you do believe that, if you believe that you are truly offering a donor an opportunity to stretch themselves spiritually, an opportunity to grow spiritually, you're going to walk into the room with a different attitude. Like you have something to give, not something to take, right? Nouwen says this, I ask for money standing up, not bowing down, because I believe in what I am about. I believe that I have something important to offer. I think that's an attitude that's important for every fundraiser, regardless of your faith background. If you're serving a nonprofit that you believe in, that you believe has value to this world, you should walk into the room believing you have something important to offer. If you don't, that's a thing to struggle with. This is a thing to think about. Another neat thing that Nouwen talked about was how fundraising can build community. He connects fundraising to what Jesus called the kingdom of God. That is that a gift doesn't just fund a program. It creates new relationships between the giver, the organization, and the mission. The goal was for donors to feel they are contributing to important love-building work, not just giving to those in need. I think he would argue that generosity, if it's done right, would draw people closer together rather than simply extracting resources from them. And I think that's an important thing for us to think about in our own work. Again, whether it's faith-based or not, there are nonprofits around the country where the donors don't know each other. They don't know the people they're helping. They don't feel really a sense of kinship or connection with the people they're joined with. But giving joins us. Giving joins us into a cause. And if we're part of a cause and part of a movement, then we have compatriots, people that are joining together with us to help make a difference in the world. And it's important that as fundraising professionals, we try to think of ways to bring those people together. And certainly along with staff, but also even with the people that they're helping. That's an important part of donor relations and stewardship. So Nouwen wrote this book from his experience personally as a fundraiser. He raised a lot of money, even though his full-time vocation was really writing and ministry as a priest. But the organization he was raising money for, it was a community where people with and without intellectual disabilities, I believe it was called Arche, Daybreak. And I'm not good with French, so I'm sure I pronounced that wrong. But they lived together as peers in this community. He really was dependent on God for that provision through fundraising. He believed that God would provide. And through community and through the generosity of the people he approached. And that's where his authority comes from. Not just religious authority, right? But he was practiced in this work and did it for many, many years. And he did it successfully. I'll never forget, as a young fundraiser, it was my first job outside of the faith-based world. And I was meeting with different leaders in my organization as part of my orientation. And this leader said to me, upon looking at my resume and understanding where I'd come from, "Oh, I guess you won't be able to raise money by scaring people with the threat of hell anymore, will you?" And it was so demeaning and so insulting that this person viewed faith-based fundraising as arm twisting with the threat of hell. That's what faith-based fundraising was about. And I've never forgotten that experience because it was just really hurtful and really reflected a deep ignorance of what our work is. And I'm so grateful to Nouwen for just the contrast between that perspective and how clearly and how succinctly he was able to really describe what Christian fundraising, what faith-based fundraising should really be. So, if you've never read a faith-based fundraising book, I highly recommend taking a look at this one because it's really special. It's really short. It can really transform the way you think about fundraising. So, thank you. Grateful to have some time with you to talk about this book that's been important to me in my life as a fundraiser. And if you liked hearing more of this faith-based material, please let me know. Make some comments on Spotify or what have you. Love to get your feedback. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider. I'm your host, Tom Dauber. Thank you for joining me as we journey together towards major gift mastery on the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast.